Wyoming Territory, July 1879, the day the townsfolk watched a cowboy marry a jailbird under the blistering sun. The gossip spread faster than a prairie fire with a wind behind it. Zeke Ashford stood tall in his best shirt, collar stiff and clean, boots polished like he was about to walk into church. But instead, he stood outside the Rawlins courthouse, marrying a woman half the town still called a thief, a liar, and worse. Her name was Loretta Hale, and she did not flinch when the preacher asked if she took this man to be her husband. She looked Zeke straight in the eye, held his calloused hand in hers, and said, "I do." With a voice clear as mountain water. The crowd murmured. Some shook their heads. A few snorted. One woman spat at the dirt. Zeke did not care. He had known Loretta only 4 months, but he had seen in her something others refused to look for truth. Not the kind you could find in records or rumors, but the kind that came out quiet and raw, late at night by a dying fire. She had served her sentence. She had paid. But in this town, forgiveness did not come easy, especially not for a woman who once picked the wrong lock and the wrong man. Zeke had been riding herd for the Allen brothers when he first saw her. She had just been released from the county jail, a satchel hanging loose at her side and her eyes sharp as flint. She was walking out of town like she had no place to be. He had offered her a ride. She refused. He trailed her anyway on horseback for half a mile before she finally turned and said, "You always follow strange women out into the hills, cowboy? Only the ones look like they got nowhere to go," Zeke had said. Nowhere turned out to be true. Loretta had no kin, no friends, no one waiting. She had been arrested 2 years ago for helping a man rob a payroll wagon near Laramie. The man vanished. She went to jail. She did not beg. She did not cry. She did not explain. Zeke did not push for her story. He only offered food and later work. He had a small spread north of town, a few steers, and a stubborn mule named Dutch. Loretta mucked stalls and fixed fence posts better than most men he had hired before. She cooked biscuits that made him forget his mother's, and she never asked for more than what she earned. The wedding came after a quiet evening on the porch, her hand brushing his knee by accident, then not pulling away. "You sure about this?" she asked him once, before he ever said the word marry. "They will talk. They will say you lost your mind." "I was never keen on what they say," he had answered. Back in town, the sheriff Thomas Bell watched the ceremony from a distance, arms folded, mouth tight. He did not like Loretta, never had, but he respected Zeke and he kept his peace. 2 weeks after the wedding, it happened. The morning was dry and hot, dust hanging thick as fog. Loretta had ridden into town for flour. Zeke stayed back to mend the barn roof. She was tying her horse outside the general store when the shots rang out. 3 men masked, armed, angry came tearing down the street on horseback. One jumped off and stormed into the sheriff's office. Sheriff Bell stepped out with his hands up. "You got the wrong town," he said, voice calm but hard. The second man raised a pistol. "We got the right one. You locked up our brother last month. We want him out." Bell reached for his gun too slow. The pistol came up. Loretta moved. She did not think. She did not plan. She just ran. She tackled the man from behind, grabbing the arm with the pistol. They hit the ground. The gun went off, missing Bell's head by inches. The sheriff fired twice. 1 man fell. The others fled. Blood spread on the dust. Loretta rolled off the man she had tackled, breathing hard, dirt on her face and knuckles scraped. Sheriff Bell looked at her, stunned. "You saved my life." She wiped her mouth. "Guess I did." Zeke showed up minutes later, galloping into town like the devil was after him. He jumped off his horse and ran to her, heart thudding so hard he could barely speak. "You all right?" he asked, grabbing her shoulders. She nodded, eyes wide, but steady. "I am now." That night, no one in town called her Jailbird. Not out loud. Zeke cooked her dinner: salt pork, beans, and the last of the cornbread. They ate on the porch, watching the sky burn orange and gold. He reached over, took her hand. She let him. "You scared me today," he said quietly. "You scared me first," she murmured. "You married me." He chuckled, low and warm. "I would do it again." She turned her face toward him, the light catching the curve of her cheek. "You really mean that?" He leaned in, kissed her slow and sure. "I love you, Loretta Hale Ashford. I do not care where you came from. I only care where we go from here." She kissed him back, hands on his face like she could anchor herself there. "I love you too," she whispered, and it felt like the first time anyone had ever said it to her, and meant it. In that moment there was no past, no bars, no names whispered behind hands. Just two people on a porch under a sky that stretched out forever, holding on to something real. And not even a whole town's judgment could take that away. Rain had not touched the land in nearly 6 weeks, and the sky hung heavy with a heat that pressed down like iron. Zeke rose before first light, drawn from bed by the stiffness in his shoulder and the quiet rustle of Loretta pulling on her boots beside him. She moved, careful not to wake him, though he was already awake, eyes open against the fading darkness. "You headed to the creek?" he asked, voice low. She paused, hand on the doorframe. "Cattle haven't come down for water since yesterday. I want to see if the east fence is holding." He sat up, rubbing a hand across his jaw. "I'll come." "No," she said, soft but sure. "Stay. You've been working that roof 2 days straight. Let me ride this one." Zeke studied her in the dim light. She stood easy in his shirt, sleeves rolled past her elbows, her braid falling over one shoulder. She looked like she'd always belonged here. He nodded and lay back, listening to her steps fade toward the barn. She returned near dusk, hat low over her brow and sweat darkening the collar of her shirt. Her horse was lathered. She swung down stiffly and walked him toward the trough. Zeke met her halfway. "You find something?" She tied off the reins and wiped her forehead with the back of her hand. "East fence is still holding. But I saw buzzards circling near the canyon bend. Went to check. Found a roan gelding dead on the slope. No brand." His eyes narrowed. "You think it wandered?" "No. Rope burns on the pastern. Looked like it broke loose." Zeke's jaw clenched. "You tell the sheriff?" "Thought I'd tell you first." He didn't answer right away. He took the reins from her and walked the horse to water. She followed, quiet, watching the last light cut across the field. Later, after supper, they sat on the edge of the porch. Crickets had started up in the tall grass. Loretta leaned forward, elbows on her knees. "Why'd you marry me, Zeke?" she asked. He looked up from rolling a cigarette. "You want the polite answer or the true one?" "True." He struck a match, lit the roll, then passed it to her. She took it without a word. "I'd been alone a long time," he said. "Long enough I stopped thinking about what it'd be like not to be. Then you showed up. And you didn't ask for sympathy. You didn't act like you owed anyone anything. You just worked, ate quiet, slept light. And I watched you every day try to live without asking for more than folks were willing to give." She let the smoke drift from her lips, eyes on the horizon. "I was scared when you asked me. I know. But I said yes because I thought maybe I could be better with someone who saw me the way you did." He reached over, his hand brushing hers. "You already were." She turned her hand over, let his fingers settle into her palm. "You think those men'll come back? The ones who tried to break their brother out?" Zeke nodded slowly. "If they think they got unfinished business, maybe. I think they saw my face." Her voice dropped, low and even. "The one I tackled, I think he saw." Zeke didn't answer at once. He just pulled her hand closer, thumb grazing the edge of her knuckles. "We'll be ready," he said. That night she didn't sleep. She lay beside him, eyes open to the rafters, her breath slow and steady but her mind cutting through the dark. She hadn't told him everything. She hadn't said that when she tackled the gunman. She recognized the way he moved, the way he held the pistol. He'd been with the man she used to run with, the one who left her holding the blame. She hadn't spoken that name in over 2 years, and now he was closer than she wanted to believe. She turned on her side, curled against Zeke's back, and pressed her forehead between his shoulder blades until sleep finally came. When morning broke, she saddled her mare before breakfast and rode into town. Sheriff Bell was outside the jail, sweeping dust from the stoop. He looked up, surprised to see her alone. "You hear about the horse?" She dismounted, tossed the reins over the hitch rail. "I'm here about the man I tackled." He set the broom aside. "You remember something?" She stepped closer. "I know who he was." Bell's eyes sharpened. "Name?" She folded her arms. "His name's Curtis Malden. Used to run with a man named Eli Traeger. They were on the Laramie payroll job. Eli vanished. I took the fall." Bell's mouth tightened. "You telling me this now because you want protection?" "No. I'm telling you because if Curtis is back, Eli might be too." Bell rubbed his jaw. "You think they're coming for you?" "They already tried once." He nodded, slow. "You ride back home. I'll send word if I hear anything." She met his eyes. "Don't wait too long." She rode back with the wind at her back and her shoulders square. The land rolled out ahead of her, dry and open, but it didn't feel empty. Felt like something was coming, and this time she'd meet it standing up. The wind carried the dry scent of sage and scorched earth across the Ashford place, and Loretta felt it against her face as she stood at the edge of the back pasture. One boot braced on the bottom rail of the fence. Behind her, the house sat quiet, the windows open to let what little breeze there was filter through. Zeke was somewhere north, riding boundary lines with 2 neighbors whose herds shared the ridgeline. He'd left before daybreak, and she hadn't expected him back until near dusk. She watched the horizon, not for him, but for something else, movement where there shouldn't be any. By midday, the sun had climbed high and the heat pressed down without mercy. She returned to the house, filled the basin, and washed the dust from her face and neck. Her hands trembled slightly when she poured the water out. She dried them slow, folded the towel, and set it back on the hook. Then she crossed the room to the cupboard, lifted the loose floorboard beneath the corner stool, and drew out the revolver Zeke had cleaned just last week. She checked the chamber, shut it, and slid it into the waistband of her skirt before stepping back outside. Near sundown, hoofbeats stirred the stillness. Not Zeke's gelding, not the rhythm she knew. She moved to the barn's shadow, hand resting on the revolver. A single rider crested the rise, lean, narrow-shouldered, with a coat too long for the weather and a rifle slung crooked behind his back. He rode slow, like he wanted to be seen but not surprised. She didn't step out. He stopped 20 paces from the gate and lifted a hand, palm out. "Looking for Zeke Ashford," he called. Loretta didn't answer. The man shifted in his saddle, scanning the yard. "Name's Boyd. From over Rollins way. Heard he's got a few head for sale." She stepped into view, eyes on his horse's sweat-darkened flank. "You rode all this way for cattle in the middle of a drought?" He gave a short laugh, dry as the grass. "Some of us ain't got the luxury of waiting for rain." She didn't smile. "Zeke's not here." Boyd nodded, slow. "You his wife?" "I am." He lowered his hand. "Tell him I'll be back in 2 days." She waited until he turned and rode off before she moved again. His horse limped slightly on the right hind. She'd seen that gait before. The same limp on a bay gelding that had been tied outside the jailhouse the day of the shooting. That night she didn't light the lamp. She sat near the window, revolver in her lap, eyes fixed on the darkening line of hills. Zeke came in after sundown, smelling of saddle leather and dust. He shut the door gently behind him, seeing her in the corner before she spoke. "Someone rode by," she said. He didn't remove his hat. "Trouble. Asked for you by name. Claimed he was after cattle." She stood, crossed the room, and placed the revolver on the table between them. "He's one of them. I'd wager my life on it." Zeke studied her face. "You think they'll come back before morning?" "I think they're already here. Watching." He pulled his rifle from the wall, checked the action, and set it against the chair. Then he reached for her hand. "They won't touch you," he said. She didn't flinch. "We won't wait for them to try." They didn't speak again that night. They sat back to back near the hearth, one watching the front, one the rear, the silence between them not empty but full of wordless understanding. At first light, they saddled both horses and rode east, toward the sheriff's office. Sheriff Bell met them outside, hat in hand. He didn't ask why they'd come. He just nodded once, opened the door, and let them in. Zeke spoke first. "They're circling. One came by the house yesterday." Bell leaned against the desk. "Describe him." Loretta did, voice even. Bell's jaw tightened. "You sure? I could draw his face from memory." He straightened. "Then I'll ride out with 2 men. We'll sweep the ridge around your property. You 2 stay here tonight. Safer in town." Zeke shook his head. "We don't run." Bell didn't argue. "Then I'll send someone to watch the house with you." Loretta stepped forward. "No. Less men, less blood." Bell looked at her a long time before nodding. "I'll send word if we find sign." As they rode back, the wind picked up, carrying with it the faint smell of ash lightning had touched somewhere far off. Zeke reached over, took her reins lightly. "There's time to change your mind." She didn't look at him. "I didn't marry you to step backward." He let go, let her ride ahead. And behind them, the storm built slowly, without thunder, but with the promise of reckoning in its bones. By the 3rd morning after Boyd had ridden up to their gate, Zeke spotted the first clear sign on the north ridge hoofprints, too fresh to belong to wild stock, pressed deep into the crusted soil beside juniper roots. He crouched low, brushing his fingers over the edge of one, then stood slowly and scanned the slope behind him. Nothing moved but the wind pushing through the brittle grass. He rode back without speaking, and when he stepped into the house, Loretta was stitching a tear in the hem of her work dress, needle flashing steady between her fingers. Her eyes lifted once, catching the tension in his shoulders. "Where?" she asked. "North Ridge. 2 horses, maybe 3. One's shod recent." He closed the door behind him. "We need to draw them out." She set the needle down, slid the fabric aside. "How?" He crossed to the table and unrolled the old surveyor's map, traced the ridgeline with his thumb. "There's a dry wash just past the bluffs. Narrow enough they'd have to ride single file. If we cut through the hollow at dusk, circle behind, we can push them toward it." "You want to trap them?" "I want them to know we're not waiting." She stood, wiping her hands on her apron. "Then we ride before the sun drops too low." They packed light canteens, rifles, nothing more, and left the house locked behind them. Dutch, Zeke's mule, brayed once as they passed the barn, but they didn't stop to quiet him. The air was tight and dry, and every sound carried too far. By the time they reached the hollow, the sun sat just above the hills, bleeding rust and gold across the sky. They dismounted, led the horses beneath the cottonwoods, and climbed the ridge on foot. From the crest, they saw the flicker of a cook fire down in the basin, half covered by a lean-to of brush and canvas. Two men sat close to it, rifles within reach. One leaned back on his elbows, the tilt of his hat revealing a pale scar slicing through his brow. Loretta's breath caught. That's him. Zeke didn't ask which. He just nodded once. We split. I'll circle east. Come in from behind. You stay high. Keep eyes on him. She adjusted the strap of her carbine. If they bolt, you fire once. I'll hear it. He disappeared into the brush, his steps deliberate and silent. Loretta moved to a higher outcrop, settled into place behind a fallen log, and steadied her rifle across its bark. Below, the men talked low, their voices too faint to catch. She watched their hands, their posture, the way one kept glancing north like he expected someone. It was nearly dark when a third figure emerged from the trees broad-shouldered, with a long coat flapping behind him. He walked like he owned the ground under his boots. Eli Traeger. Loretta knew him even before he turned. The tilt of his head, the way he tucked his chin when he laughed. She hadn't seen it since the day he'd left her bleeding and cuffed outside the freight office in Laramie. Her fingers tightened on the rifle stock. Her breath stayed steady. From the east, a bird startled from the brush, wings thrashing. One of the men stood. That ain't no bird, he said. Then Zeke walked out of the trees, rifle slung, hands open at his sides. You're a long way from town, he said calmly. Eli tipped his head slowly. So are you. Zeke stopped 5 paces away. You've been sniffing around my land. I want to know why. The man with the scar stepped forward, rifle half raised. You'd best walk away, cowboy. Zeke didn't blink. You make a move, I won't miss. From her perch, Loretta watched Eli's hand drift toward his belt. She aimed low, squeezed the trigger once. The shot hit the dirt inches from his boot. Eli froze. Zeke didn't move. Voice sharp, Loretta called down. Next one's not a warning. Eli raised his hands slow. Didn't know you were the type to shoot without trial, Loretta. I had my trial, she said. And you never showed to testify. Zeke stepped forward, rifle now steady in his grip. You're leaving. Now, you don't ride by sundown, the sheriff comes next. Scarface looked to Eli. You said they wouldn't fight. Eli's jaw clenched. I said she wouldn't. Loretta chambered another round. You were wrong. The 3 turned, muttering low. Then they mounted and rode hard west. No backward glances. Zeke waited until their shapes vanished into the trees, then lowered his rifle. She didn't climb down until he called her name. At the base of the ridge, he met her halfway, his hands pulling her in with a suddenness that surprised them both. You all right? He asked against her hair. She nodded, face tucked against his chest. I didn't want to kill him, but I would've. He pulled back just far enough to look at her. You didn't have to. She stepped away, wiping dust from her cheek. They won't come back. No, he agreed. They won't. They rode back slow under a rising moon. The air cooler now, the wind brushing through the cottonwoods like a song half remembered. At the house, she took off her boots by the door, then lit the lamp and struck a match for the stove. Zeke leaned against the doorway, watching her move through the kitchen without words. Marrying me turned out rougher than you planned, she said finally. He stepped forward, took the match from her fingers, and lit the fire himself. I don't regret a damn thing. She looked up at him, eyes soft. Even with all this? He kissed her then, slow and certain, hands at her waist. When he pulled back, his voice was quiet. You're the only thing I've ever done right. She leaned into him, and for a long while, they stood there, the fire catching, the warmth spreading. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying the scent of rain at last. The first rain came before dawn, tapping lightly on the roof like a hesitant visitor. Loretta woke to the sound, her body still curled against Zeke's beneath the wool blanket. She didn't move, not at first. She just listened, the soft patter easing something inside her that had been wound tight for longer than she cared to name. Zeke stirred beside her, then slid an arm around her waist and pulled her closer. "You hear it?" he murmured. She nodded against his chest. "I thought it might never come." He pressed a kiss to her temple, slow and warm. Some things just take their time. By midday, the ground had softened enough to leave deep tracks behind the barn. They walked the pasture together, boots sinking slightly with each step. The cattle had gathered closer to the creek, tails flicking lazily, content for the first time in weeks. Loretta paused by the gate, resting her arms along the top rail, watching the sky shift in color between pale gray and silver. "When I first got out, I used to dream about places that didn't remember me," she said, voice quiet. "Towns where no one knew my face, where I could start over without having to explain who I was or what I'd done." Zeke leaned beside her, hands clasped loosely in front of him. "And now," she turned her head, eyes steady. "Now I think any place can be new. You just have to stay long enough to let it forget the old you." His fingers brushed hers. "You changed more than this place did." She gave a small breath of a laugh. "You helped." He shrugged. "You would have found your way either way. I just happened to be standing there when you did." They stayed at the fence until the light began to shift again, dusk slipping in quiet and cool. The fields smelled of wet earth, and the wind had softened, no longer sharp but carrying something gentler. That evening, Zeke brought in a bundle of dry wood from the lean-to and built a fire in the hearth. Loretta stood at the kitchen counter, grinding coffee beans with the small hand mill they'd bartered for 2 months back. The sound was rhythmic, grounding. "You ever think about what comes next?" she asked, not turning. Zeke straightened from the fire, brushing ash from his hands. "You mean after all the running's done?" She glanced at him over her shoulder. "I mean now. We've got land, cattle, a roof that doesn't leak. That's more than most." He walked to her, set one hand on the counter beside hers. "I think about raising something that doesn't need a brand." She looked up. "You mean a child?" He nodded once. "If you wanted." Her eyes didn't leave his. "I do." He exhaled like he'd been holding it too long. "Then we'll build on that, one piece at a time." They spent that night in quiet joy, no grand declarations, just the nearness of skin and breath and the comfort of knowing the worst had already been faced. Weeks passed. Sheriff Bell rode out once to let them know that Eli Traeger had been spotted in Utah territory, heading south fast and alone. He didn't ask questions about what had passed on the ridge. He just tipped his hat to Loretta and said, "Some folks don't need a badge to serve justice." She nodded once. "Some of us just needed the chance." Zeke built a new coop behind the barn, and Loretta began tending rows of beans and squash along the south fence. When the first green shoots broke through the soil, she knelt beside them, fingers gentle, and whispered something Zeke couldn't hear. He didn't ask. He just watched her with a quiet reverence, like she was something rare and rising. They repaired the porch, added a second rocker, and on warm evenings sat side by side, watching the sun dip below the hills. Sometimes they spoke of the future, sometimes of nothing at all, but always with the ease of two souls no longer guarding their edges. One morning, long after the rains had soaked deep into the roots of everything, Loretta stood barefoot on the porch with one hand resting low over her belly. Zeke stepped up behind her, wrapping his arms around her middle, and they stood like that, watching the mist burn off the fields. "You think it'll be a girl or a boy?" she asked softly. He smiled against her shoulder. "Doesn't matter, long as they've got your grit." She leaned back into him, eyes on the land that stretched wide and open before them. "Then they'll do just fine." And they did. In the years that followed, they added a second room to the house, then a third. Zeke's herd grew modest and steady, enough to keep them fed and the barn full. Loretta taught their daughter how to ride, how to shoot straight, and how to hold her chin up even when the world tried to lower it. Zeke taught her how to listen to the land, how to build with patience, and how to love with quiet strength. No one in town called Loretta anything but her name, and on the land where judgment had once lingered, only peace remained.